The Pocophone F1 could very well be the most anticipated and requested budget phone of this year. We should poke around on the inside for a second. With massive specs and a super cheap price point, it's easy to see why it's so popular. Let's get started. Getting inside the Pocophone F1 is pretty simple. There is no waterproofing gluing everything together, it just has the two T3 screws down at the bottom, and a screen that pops out of the back panel like the older iPhones used to do. The screen's pretty tightly situated inside that back housing though, which is why we didn't see the screen pop out of the housing during the bin test. It's tight. After removing the SD card tray, I was able to eventually detach the 1080p display and hardware away from the back panel. As it detaches, we get our first look inside the Pocophone with the fingerprint scanner ribbon attached to the inside of the polycarbonate back plastic panel. I'll switch my screwdriver bit to a normal Phillips head, which I'll link below, and remove the 10 screws holding the black plastics above the motherboard. Once those plastics are removed, we get a glimpse at what looks like a complex smorgasbord of connectors, but it's actually pretty simple. I'll unplug the battery first, so there's not any power running through the phone while we continue to operate. Then we'll get the fingerprint scanner unsnapped like a little Lego, and set the entire back panel off to the side. There's no making this one clear since everything's plastic, but at least we got an art class with Jerry out of it. A quick disconnect of the side buttons and black signal wire connector, and the extension ribbon for the charging port, leaves us with two silver screws holding in the motherboard. I'll keep these separate from the other 12 screws we've already removed, and then the screen ribbon cable gets unplugged. The whole motherboard can now be pulled out of the phone body, exposing the tip of Xiaomi's F1 liquid cooling system, a copper heat pipe with a dollop of thermal paste on top, which helps to transfer the heat away from the processor, keeping things running more efficiently. We'll find the other end of the copper pipe in a second. First, the motherboard. Up here is pretty interesting. We have the front-facing 20 megapixel camera with an infrared illuminator next to it that works in tandem with the infrared camera for the face unlock feature. There are two rear cameras facing the opposite direction, each with their own individual Lego-style connector, and both cameras are situated in the same metal housing, lined up perfectly so they can assist each other with photo detail while taking pictures. The main 12 megapixel sensor does have some movement to the lens, but it's probably just for focusing, as the Pocophone does not include optical image stabilization on either of the rear cameras, which is a little disappointing, but it is still a budget phone. The last thing I want to point out is that inside this phone there are water damage indicators on every single surface, including both sides of the motherboard. They are currently white, but turn pink if your phone is around water, or even steam from the pool or the shower, so keep it dry and away from moisture. This massive advertised 4,000 mAh battery has the same capacity as the $1,000 Note 9, and over double the capacity of an iPhone 8. Thankfully it does come with its own pull tab and manageable adhesive. The battery has a rated capacity of 3,900 mAh and a peak of 4,000. Now that the battery's out, we finally get a closer look at the other end of the copper heat pipe. This time around it doesn't include a large copper plate, like we saw in the Samsung Note 9, but it looks to be about the same length. I'd compare the two side by side, but I kinda chopped the Note 9 pipe into bits. Either way, in the Pocophone F1, the copper heat pipe conductively pulls heat away from the processor into the slightly cooler area underneath the battery. Xiaomi calls this a liquid cooling system with industry-leading thermal performance. Boiling down the big words, it really just means it's a copper heatsink with less than a drop of water inside a vacuum-sealed pipe. If I pop open the pipe quick enough, you can see the water evaporate out of the vacuum into the air. These little fibers inside the pipe help wick the water to and from the heat, exactly like we saw in the Galaxy Note 9. It's definitely a cool system, and especially awesome to see inside of a budget phone like this Pocophone F1. Definitely deserves a thumbs up for that. I like seeing that the competition in the budget realm drives bigger innovations with the major flagships. I'll just, close this back up. Perfect. Let's see what kind of vibrator we're working with. 7 screws hold the black plastics over the charging port daughter board, including 2 sweet-looking blue screws. Never seen that before. The plastics pop off, including the loudspeaker, along with its 2 golden contact pads. Still 0 signs of waterproofing. I'll remove the black signal wire, and you can see another big white water damage indicator right next to the charging port hole. The red stuff underneath bleeds through the white portion when it's wet. The charging port board has some adhesive holding it to the frame. There is no rubber ring around the charging port itself, so once again, this thing has no protection against liquid whatsoever. The circular vibrator is in the bottom right corner, and he's a tiny little guy. Overall, I'm super impressed with Xiaomi's new Pocophone project. I haven't always been a fan of Xiaomi's build quality, since they do have a few phones on my shelf of shame, but they've taken a huge step in the right direction with this durable, yet extremely powerful budget phone. I'll get the 2 silver screws back into the top of the motherboard. I always have my fingers crossed when it's time to see if these phones still work after a teardown. I'll make sure everything's plugged in, including the fingerprint scanner and the battery, before putting the black plastic plate with its 10 screws back into place. Finally, I'll pinch the 2 halves of the Pocophone back together. And this phone is a winner. Hit that subscribe button. I have a lot of fun videos on the way. Would you consider buying this Pocophone? What's your next phone gonna be? Thanks a ton for watching, and I'll see you around.